What would you do if a single piece of jewelry could shatter the walls you've built around your heart for over 2 decades? Brandon Ashworth thought he had everything under control. At 42, he commanded a real estate empire worth hundreds of millions, owned properties across New England, and lived in a world where every decision was calculated, every emotion buried beneath layers of financial success. His life was a masterpiece of precision, cold, efficient, and utterly empty. But on a chilly October morning in Boston, as he walked through the historic lobby of his latest acquisition, the Grand View Hotel, something impossible happened. Something that would force this reclusive millionaire to confront a past he had spent 23 years trying to forget. It started with a simple glint of silver on the wrist of Rosa, the hotel's new cleaning lady. A delicate bracelet with 3 small charms, a star, a crescent moon, and a tiny heart engraved with initials that made Brandon's blood run cold. BA plus SM. This wasn't just any bracelet. This was the bracelet, the one he had given to Sophia Martinez in 2001, when they were both young, hopeful Harvard students who believed love could conquer anything. The one that had slipped from his trembling fingers the night he destroyed the only real relationship he'd ever had. The one that belonged to the woman who haunted his dreams and shaped every empty day that followed. But how did it end up on Rosa's wrist? And what dark secrets would its presence unlock? Over the next 30 minutes, you'll witness Brandon's journey. From a man who had buried his heart beneath mountains of money to someone forced to face the most painful truth of his life. You'll discover why he abandoned the love of his life, what really happened to Sophia Martinez, and how a simple piece of jewelry became the key to redemption he never thought possible. This is a story about the devastating power of family pressure and social expectations. How love sometimes means making the ultimate sacrifice, the difference between wealth and true fulfillment, second chances that come in the most unexpected forms, and the quiet heroism of ordinary people who carry extraordinary love. This story will take you through the streets of Boston, into the halls of Harvard University, and deep into the heart of an immigrant family's struggle in America. You'll experience the suffocating weight of impossible choices, the sharp pain of love interrupted, and ultimately, the transformative power of forgiveness. Brandon Ashworth thought his story ended the night he walked away from Sophia Martinez. He was wrong. Sometimes the most important chapters of our lives are written not when we're young and fearless, but when we're older, wiser, and finally ready to face the truth about who we really are. Are you ready to discover how a millionaire's carefully constructed world can crumble at the sight of a simple silver bracelet? How can a cleaning lady hold the key to healing a broken heart? And how true love never really dies. It just finds new ways to change the world. Then join us as we uncover the truth behind the bracelet, the woman who wore it, and the man who finally learned that some debts can only be paid with the heart. This is Brandon's story. This is Sophia's legacy. This is how love finds a way, even when it seems impossible. Let's begin. This is how a millionaire melts when the cleaning lady shows him the bracelet he gave his first love. The cold. October winds swept through the streets of Back Bay in Boston, carrying golden leaves that dance between the historic red brick buildings. Brandon Ashworth adjusted his Italian wool coat as he walked down Newbury Street, his leather shoes echoing on the damp pavement. At 42, he had built a real estate empire that made him one of the wealthiest men in Massachusetts, but his expression remained as cold as the Boston morning. The Grand View Hotel rose before him like a monument to the 19th century, its arched windows reflecting the gray sky. Brandon had purchased the property 3 months earlier for $45 million, with plans to transform it into the most exclusive boutique hotel in New England. To him, it was just another investment, another conquest to add to his portfolio. Mr. Ashworth. Marcus, his assistant's voice echoed through the ornate lobby. The contractors are waiting on the third floor. Brandon nodded briefly, his eyes automatically scanning every detail of the reception area. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen tears, and the Italian marble he had installed gleamed under the lights. Everything perfect, everything calculated, everything soulless, exactly like his life. As he climbed the mahogany stairs, he passed a middle-aged Latina woman who was carefully cleaning the handrails with meticulous care. She wore a simple, blue uniform, her graying hair pulled back in a tight bun. Brandon barely registered her presence. To him, employees were just part of the machinery necessary to keep his businesses running. "Rosa, can you clean the third-floor office later?" Marcus said, passing by them. "Of course, Mr. Marcus," she replied with a slight accent. "I'm almost finished here." That's when it happened. Rosa raised her hand to brush a strand of hair from her face, and the light from the chandelier above caught something on her wrist. Brandon stopped mid-step, his heart jumping as if he'd been electrically shocked. The bracelet. Delicate, aged silver, with 3 small charms, a star, a crescent moon, and a tiny heart engraved with the initials BA+SM. Brandon knew every curve of that metal, every scratch caused by time. He had chosen that bracelet himself in a small jewelry store in Cambridge 23 years ago, when he was still a college student full of dreams and in love with a brown-eyed girl named Sofia Martinez. "You..." His voice came out as a hoarse whisper. Rosa looked at him, surprised by the sudden attention. "That bracelet. Where did you get it?" Rosa's dark eyes filled with caution. "It's mine, sir. A family heirloom." Brandon felt the world spin around him. The hotel walls seemed to close in, and for a moment he wasn't in the lobby of his $1 million investment anymore, but back on Harvard's campus, holding Sophia's hand as they walked through Harvard Yard in the fall of 2001. "I'm sorry," he murmured, running his hand through his perfectly styled hair. It reminds me of something." Rosa watched him with an expression Brandon couldn't decipher. There was knowledge there, perhaps even pity. "Sometimes memories find us when we least expect them, don't they, Mr. Ashworth?" Marcus appeared again at the foot of the stairs. "Mr. Ashworth? The contractors are waiting." Brandon blinked, returning to the present. Yes, of course. But his eyes remained fixed on the bracelet until Rosa disappeared down the hallway, taking with her a piece of his past that he had buried under years of ambition and financial success. The rest of the morning passed in a confused haze. Brandon pretended to pay attention to discussions about Carrara marble and gold finishes, but his mind was miles away, lost in memories of a time when money didn't matter and love seemed to be the only real thing in the world. When he was finally alone in his temporary office at the hotel, Brandon collapsed into the leather chair, his head in his hands. For the first time in more than 2 decades, he allowed himself to remember Sofia Martinez and the terrible night when he lost her forever. Night had fallen over Boston, transforming the Grandview Hotel's windows into dark mirrors that reflected Brandon's inner turmoil. He remained in his temporary office, surrounded by architectural plans and financial projections, but his mind was trapped in the fall of 2001. Sofia Martinez had been different from all the girls he'd known at Harvard. The daughter of Mexican immigrants, she worked 3 jobs to pay for her psychology studies, but always had a radiant smile and a word of encouragement for everyone around her. Brandon, then 19 and heir to a modest family construction company, had fallen madly in love with her determination and genuine kindness. The memory of the first time he saw Sofia still made him smile involuntarily. It was October, just like now, and she was in Widener Library, surrounded by stacks of books, her brown hair falling over her face as she studied. When she looked up and smiled at him, Brandon knew his life had changed forever. "Why are you looking at me like that?" Sophia had asked that afternoon, laughing softly. "Because you're the most beautiful person I've ever seen," Brandon replied. With the brutal honesty of 19, they became inseparable. Sophia introduced him to a world he had never known. Family dinners at the modest Martinez home in East Boston, where Sophia's mother, Carmen, insisted on feeding him until he couldn't move. Sophia's father, Eduardo, worked as a janitor in 3 different buildings, but spoke about his daughter's dreams with a pride that made his eyes shine. "My Sophia is going to be a psychologist," Eduardo would say, patting Brandon's shoulder. "She's going to help people, make a difference in the world." Brandon remembered how at home he felt in that small kitchen, surrounded by the genuine warmth of the Martinez family. It was so different from the calculated coldness of his own family, where every conversation revolved around profits and losses. The bracelet had been his way of showing Sophia that she meant everything to him. He saved for 2 months, working part-time at a construction supply store, to buy that small silver jewel. It wasn't much, but for 2 college students, it represented a significant sacrifice. "BA plus SM," Sophia had murmured, tracing the engraved initials on the small heart with her finger. "Brandon and Sophia forever, forever," he had repeated, truly believing those words, but forever lasted only until the spring of 2002. Brandon's father, William Ashworth, discovered his son's relationship with Sophia and was not pleased at all. William was a traditional man, obsessed with social position and the purity of his family lineage. The idea of his son getting seriously involved with the immigrant's daughter infuriated him. "You can have fun with whoever you want," William said one night in his Beacon Hill mansion study. "But don't confuse fun with commitment. You have responsibilities, Brandon, to our family, to our business." Brandon, young and idealistic, rejected his father's pressures until William played his final card. "Eduardo Martinez is having immigration problems," William said with calculated coldness. "It seems there are some irregularities in his documentation. It would be a shame if this information reached the proper authorities." The threat was crystal clear. Brandon knew his father had enough connections to destroy the Martinez family. Eduardo could be deported, Carmen would lose her job, and Sophia's dreams of becoming a psychologist would disappear like smoke. "What do you want?" Brandon had asked, his voice trembling with anger and desperation. "For you to make the right choice. End it with her. Now." Brandon spent 3 sleepless nights walking the streets of Cambridge, trying to find a solution that didn't exist. He was too young, without his own resources, completely dependent on his father. There was no way to protect Sophia and her family from William's revenge. On the 4th night, he made the most difficult and cowardly decision of his life. He found Sophia in the same place where they had met, in the library. She was wearing the bracelet as always, and smiled when she saw him approach, but something in his expression made her frown. "Brandon, what happened?" He sat beside her, his hands shaking. "Sophia, we need to talk." What followed was the most painful conversation of his life. Brandon lied with an ease that disgusted him, saying he had met someone else, that he wasn't ready for something serious, that he thought it was better for them to go their separate ways. Sophia listened in silence, her tears falling on the open books. When he finished, she simply took the bracelet off her wrist and placed it on the table between them. "Then keep it," she said, her voice broken. "I don't want anything that reminds me of you anymore." Brandon picked up the bracelet, but his hands were shaking so much that it fell to the floor. When he bent down to pick it up, Sophia had already disappeared among the library shelves. He never saw her again. Now, 23 years later, Brandon looked at his own hands, hands that had signed million-dollar contracts, that had built an empire, that had touched countless women, but that had never forgotten the feeling of Sophia's bracelet slipping through his fingers. A gentle knock on the door brought him back to the present. Rosa entered, carrying a tray with coffee. "I thought you might need this," she said gently. "It's past midnight." Brandon looked at her. Really looked this time. Rosa was about 50 years old, with soft wrinkles around her eyes that spoke of a life full of smiles and tears. There was a dignity in her posture that reminded him of Rosa, he said softly. "Did you know Sophia Martinez?" Rosa's eyes filled with a deep and familiar sadness. "I did, Mr. Ashworth. Sophia was my younger sister." The silence that followed Rosa's revelation was deafening. Brandon felt as if all the air had been sucked out of the office, leaving him struggling to breathe. Rosa placed the coffee tray on the table with slightly trembling hands, her eyes never leaving Brandon's face. "Your sister," Brandon repeated, his voice coming out as a whisper. "Sophia was your sister." Rosa nodded slowly, her hands meeting in her lap. "Younger sister by 5 years. My parents. They had Sophia after they thought they couldn't have more children. She was our golden girl, our miracle." Brandon stood from his chair, walking to the window overlooking Newbury Street. Outside, Boston slept under a cloud-heavy sky, but his mind was thousands of miles away, lost in guilt and regret. "You know who I am," he said, more a statement than a question. "I knew the moment you looked at the bracelet," Rosa replied, her voice heavy with old pain. "Sophia told me about you many times, about the Harvard boy who made her believe in fairy tales." Brandon closed his eyes, pressing his forehead against the cold glass of the window. "And about the boy who broke her heart. That too." The weight of guilt Brandon had carried for more than 2 decades seemed to double in that moment. He turned to face Rosa, seeing in her eyes the reflection of the pain he had caused. How was she after we broke up? Rosa sighed deeply, as if preparing to relive painful memories. "Sophia came home that night crying like I had never seen. Mama stayed up with her until dawn, just holding her while she cried. For weeks, she could barely eat, barely study." Brandon felt a sharp stab in his chest. "I didn't want to hurt her. You have to believe me." "I know," Rosa said gently, surprising him. "Sophia knew too." "What do you mean?" Rosa stood, walking to where Brandon was. "Do you really think an immigrant family survives in Boston for so many years without learning to recognize when someone is being threatened? Papa may have worked as a janitor, but he wasn't stupid. Neither was Sophia." Brandon stared at her, confused. "What do you mean?" "Sophia found out about your father's threats," Rosa explained, her voice gaining strength. "It took a few weeks, but she found out. One of Papa's friends worked in the building where your father had his office. He overheard a conversation, some phone calls. William Ashworth wasn't exactly discreet when it came to his persuasion tactics." Brandon's world seemed to crumble around him. "She knew. She knew you were trying to protect our family the only way a 19-year-old boy knew how. By choosing to sacrifice your own happiness for her safety." Brandon collapsed into the chair, his hands covering his face. 23 years of guilt, 23 years believing he had destroyed the life of the woman he loved out of pure cowardice. And now he discovered that Sophia had understood his motives. "Why did she never try to contact me?" he asked, his voice muffled by his hands. "Because she loved you too much to make things harder for you," Rosa replied. "And because she was too proud to beg for a love that someone had forced you to abandon." Rosa sat in the chair across from Brandon, waiting for him to process the information. When he finally lifted his head, his eyes were red. What happened to her? After college, Sophia graduated with honors, as she always planned. She became a psychologist, specialized in family therapy. She helped hundreds of people over the years, especially immigrant families facing the same challenges we faced. Brandon smiled through his tears. She achieved her dream. She did. She married a good man, Miguel, when she was 28. They had two beautiful children, Isabella and Carlos. Sophia was an incredible mother, Brandon. Her children adored her. Was. The word came out as a whisper of terror. Rosa closed her eyes for a moment, gathering strength. Sophia died 3 years ago. Breast cancer. She fought for 2 years, but the sound that came from Brandon's throat was almost animal. He doubled over as if he had been punched in the stomach, sobbing uncontrollably. Rosa stood and placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "She talked about you at the end," Rosa said softly. "When she was in the hospital, sedated by morphine, sometimes she would murmur your name. Brandon, Brandon, my first love. I should have fought for her," Brandon moaned. "I should have found a way. You were a boy, Brandon. A scared boy trying to protect the people he loved the only way he knew how. Sophia never blamed you for that. In fact, she once said that it taught her that true love sometimes means making painful sacrifices." Brandon lifted his head, looking at Rosa through his tears. "The bracelet, how did you?" "Sophia gave it to me on the last day," Rosa explained, touching the jewelry on her wrist. She said, "Rosa, this represents my first love, the purest love I ever felt. When I'm gone, I want you to wear it, and remember that true love exists even when it can't last forever." "And you recognized me when you saw me?" Rosa smiled sadly. "Brandon Ashworth, the young billionaire from Boston whose photos appear in Forbes and the Wall Street Journal. Of course I recognized you. You have the same kind eyes that Sophia described so many times. She always said your eyes were her favorite part, that they showed your soul." Brandon was silent for a long moment, processing everything he had discovered. Sophia had understood his sacrifice, had forgiven his cowardice, had built a beautiful and meaningful life. And now she was gone, forever beyond his reach. "Her children," he said finally. "Isabella and Carlos. How are they?" Rosa hesitated. "They're struggling. Miguel does what he can, but he works 2 jobs to pay the medical bills that were left behind. Isabella is 17, brilliant like her mother, but probably won't be able to go to college. Carlos is 15, starting to hang out with the wrong crowd in the neighborhood." "Where do they live?" "In Dorchester, in the same apartment where Sophia grew up after we moved from East Boston." Brandon stood, a new determination shining in his eyes. For the first time in 23 years, he knew exactly what he needed to do. The morning sun filtered through the office curtains when Brandon finally lifted his head from the desk. He had spent the entire night working, making calls, moving resources, creating something he hoped would honor Sophia's memory and protect her family in the way he couldn't do 2 decades ago. Rosa appeared at the door at 7 in the morning, bringing fresh coffee and a worried look. "Did you spend the whole night here?" she asked, placing the cup beside the papers scattered across the desk. "I had work to do," Brandon replied, his voice hoarse but determined. "Rosa, I need you to help me with something." "Of course. I want to meet Isabella and Carlos. I want to meet Miguel, but..." He hesitated, running his hand through his disheveled hair. "Not as Brandon Ashworth, the billionaire, just as someone who loved Sophia." Rosa studied him for a moment. "They don't know about you. Sophia never told her children about her first love. That's better, for now." 3 hours later, Brandon stood in front of an apartment building in Dorchester, wearing simple jeans and a flannel shirt, clothes he had quickly bought at a neighborhood store. Rosa was beside him, serving as a bridge between 2 worlds that seemed light years apart. "Miguel," Rosa called when a middle-aged man opened the door. "This is Brandon, a friend of Sophia's. He'd like to meet the children." Miguel Herrera was a short, stocky man with calloused hands and gentle eyes that painfully reminded Brandon of Eduardo Martinez. He invited them into the small apartment, which was impeccably clean despite the old furniture. Sophia mentioned, Brandon a few times, Miguel said, offering coffee. Said he was special to her when she was young. Isabella appeared from the kitchen, a 17-year-old who was a younger, striking version of Sophia. She had the same intelligent brown eyes and the same warm smile. When she greeted Brandon, he had to struggle not to cry. "Did you know Mom in college?" Isabella asked, genuine curiosity shining in her voice. "I did," Brandon replied. "She was extraordinary." Carlos appeared shortly after, a 15-year-old with a sullen face and a defensive attitude that Brandon immediately recognized. He had had the same posture as a teenager, when anger at the family situation consumed him from within. During the next hour, Brandon listened to stories about Sophia, how she made star-shaped pancakes on Sundays, how she read stories to the children every night, how she worked tirelessly to help other families while raising her own. "She always said we had to give back to the community," Isabella explained, "that when someone gives us an opportunity, we have to pass that opportunity forward." "Mom wanted me to be a doctor," Carlos murmured, speaking for the first time since he'd arrived. "Said I had a healer's hands. And why aren't you going to be?" Brandon asked gently. Carlos shrugged, but Miguel answered, "College bills. It's complicated." Brandon nodded, understanding perfectly. "Can I ask a personal question? Would you like Isabella to be able to go to college?" "Of course," Miguel replied. "She was accepted to Northeastern, but the tuition is too high," Isabella completed, trying to sound casual, but Brandon could see the disappointment in her eyes. That night, back at the hotel, Brandon finalized the plans he had been developing. The next morning, he called Miguel. "Miguel, this is Brandon. I need to talk to you about something important." An hour later, Miguel was in the hotel office, nervously looking at the papers Brandon had placed before him. "What is this?" he asked. "It's a foundation," Brandon explained. "The Sofia Martinez Herrera Foundation. It will provide scholarships for young people from immigrant families who want to pursue careers in healthcare or social services." Miguel frowned. "I don't understand." "Isabella will be our first scholarship recipient. Full college, all costs uncovered, and Carlos, when his time comes, him too. But why? You barely know us." Brandon took a deep breath. "Miguel, I need to tell you the truth. Sophia and we were much more than just friends in college. I loved her deeply, and for complicated reasons, I had to let her go. I never stopped regretting that decision." Miguel stared at him for a long moment. "You're the Brandon, her first love." "I am. And I know I can't bring Sophia back. I can't undo the lost years. But I can ensure that her children have all the opportunities she wanted to give them. This is very generous, but I can't accept charity." "It's not charity," Brandon interrupted firmly. "It's love. It's a debt I owe to Sophia, to you, to myself. Please, let me do this." Miguel was silent for a long time, tears streaming down his face. Finally, he nodded. 3 months later, Brandon was sitting at the first annual Sofia Martinez Herrera Foundation event, held in the renovated lobby of the Grandview Hotel. Isabella was there, radiant in her high school graduation dress, ready to begin her studies at Northeastern. Carlos was beside her, taller and more confident, talking excitedly about his plans to become a nurse. Rosa approached Brandon during the reception, still wearing the silver bracelet on her wrist. "Sophia would be proud," she said softly. "Do you think so?" Brandon asked, watching Isabella laugh with other foundation scholarship recipients. "I'm sure of it. You know, she used to say that true love never really dies. It just finds new ways." to express itself. Brandon smiled, feeling a peace he hadn't experienced in decades. For the first time since that terrible night in the Harvard library, he wasn't running from his memories of Sophia. Instead, he was honoring them, transforming his pain into something beautiful and lasting. "Rosa," he said softly, "can I ask you something?" "Of course. Could you tell me more stories about Sophia? About the woman she became, the mother she was? I'd like to know her as she really was, not just as I remember her." Rosa smiled, her eyes shining with happy tears. "I'd be delighted to, Brandon. Sophia would love to know that you two finally found each other again." That night, after everyone had gone home, Brandon stood alone in the hotel lobby, looking at a photo of Sophia that had been displayed during the event. It was a recent photo, showing her with her children, smiling with the same light he remembered from their college days. "Thank you, Sophia," he murmured, "for forgiving me, for teaching me that true love sometimes means letting go and sometimes means finding a new way to hold on." Outside, Boston slept under a starry sky, and for the first time in 23 years, Brandon Ashworth slept peacefully, knowing he had finally found a way to honor the first and true love of his life. 5 years later, the Sofia Martinez Herrera Foundation had helped over 200 young people achieve their higher education dreams. Isabella had graduated from medical school and had just been accepted to Harvard Medical School. Carlos was in his second year of nursing and worked part-time at a community clinic. Brandon never married. Some people said he had finally found peace in helping others, that he had discovered that true success wasn't measured in dollars, but in lives touched and dreams fulfilled. And sometimes, when Rosa came to visit him at the hotel, now promoted to special services manager, she still wore the silver bracelet. They would sit together, drinking coffee and sharing memories of Sophia, keeping alive the memory of a woman who had taught them both that true love can take many forms, but never really dies. The small silver bracelet continued to shine on Rosa's wrist, a silent reminder that sometimes the greatest love stories aren't about being together, but about carrying someone's love forward, transforming it into something beautiful that touches the world long after the person is gone. The end. That's it for today. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. It really helps me keep creating content for you. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I love seeing how far these videos go. See you in the next one.